Hey Islanders, and welcome to episode 64 of the Camano Voice. Today I continue my conversation with Bonnie and Andy Swanson from Paws, Bees. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview folks around Camano Island and beyond. If you want to stay up to date on events, businesses, and even hear a little history of this area, subscribe to this podcast and share with your friends. Thanks for listening. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. I'm not going to do too big of an intro, but I wanted to let you know this is part 2 of my interview with Andy and Bonnie Swanson from Paws, Bees. So if you haven't heard part 1, make sure to go back to last week's episode and listen to that before you jump into this one. All right, here it is. Yeah. So then, how did with the mites and stuff? How have you guys handled dealing with those? Because that's now just a continuous problem, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The way we've dealt with it is, and it's a little bit controversial, but we do not use anything for. So we don't use any miticide chemicals. We don't use any antibiotics, right? And so I do a queen breeding program with a couple of other people. And we do the James Bond live and let die, okay? So what lives, lives, and we breed. What dies, dies, and we let it die, okay? In that process, it's quite a painful process. When I first started, I could lose 90% of my hives, 95% of my hives. Wow. Now it's about 50-50 as far as what I lose and what I keep. There'll be a day when we'll be able to keep more like 70 or maybe even 80%. It used to be for beekeepers that they would have a 10% death, but the 90% would do well and it wouldn't matter, and they would make their splits and do whatever else and move forward, right? But now when you're looking at all of those things, now the commercial beekeepers who use everything they can under the sun are losing north of 40%. So we are just about ready to meet eye to eye as far as using everything or using nothing, and the death rate is the same.
Wow.
And what will happen here pretty soon is everybody using the chemicals that they want to use and the antibiotics that they want to use are going to actually have a higher death rate than the natural beekeepers of what we are doing. We're just about ready to flip-flop those numbers, right? Yeah, I want to eat my honey. I want to be able to have the things that I create and enjoy. And a lot of the things that they use inside of that hive, I would never want to use and try to eat anything out of there. Now, when it comes to commercial beekeepers, because they don't care about their honey and they don't care about producing a crop, and they're just doing the production and they're just doing for pollination, I believe there is going to be a separation in some time in the world there where they will allow beekeepers, if they aren't making honey and they're only doing pollination crops, they are going to have a different certificate and they're going to be able to use chemicals that they don't care about, right? And in the industry, when you're looking at agriculture, they don't use the same cattle for beef as they use for milk.
Right.
They don't use the same chicken to make an egg like they're going to make for a frying pan, right? So it's not uncommon inside of the agricultural world where you're going to make a distinction between this is this and that is that, right? And so that needs to happen anyway because they're using things that I think are not okay inside of the hive, and it gets spread around all over the place. The U.S. government is trying to get all antibiotics out of our food chain, okay? And that's a real problem for beekeepers because there's several different ones that they use.
Because a year ago, they were required to get a prescription, and the vets were like, through a vet, because they realized that there's antibiotics in the hive. And so the vets are like, what do you mean antibiotics for bees? And so there's been this whole learning curve, and I think it's going to force, like you said, some changes.
Yeah, it's going to force some changes. And one of the problems is usually when you're using an antibiotic is because you're going to cure something. Inside of it for hives, when you're doing it for nosema, for example, you're not curing anything. You're just holding it down. And when you're dealing with foul brood, you're just holding it at bay. You're not curing it, right?
Okay.
And so that's kind of counterintuitive when it comes to using antibiotics, which means they constantly have to use antibiotics constantly all the time. And also when it comes to miticide chemicals, they have created a much stronger mite. If you use a chemical And like say cockroaches, they've used lots of different things to kill cockroaches. Have they killed the cockroaches? Yeah, they've killed a lot of them. Have they gotten to the point where they killed all of them and it's been done? No, they haven't. They've just made a very strong cockroach, all right? The same with mites inside of a hive. They've managed to kill 90 or 95% of them. They use something until all of a sudden, effectively, it doesn't kill them anymore and they move on to the next ugly chemical. But bottom line of all of it is that they have done that to the mite to a point where that mite that when we started in the 1990s is completely different than the mite that we're dealing with now. Right.
And they've tried oxalic acid, which is quote natural. They've tried hops, a number of things. Back when we first started and we're doing some of these things, we went to hops. It was like, whoa, we went to Randy Oliver, one of our favorite scientific beekeeping. He's a really good resource. I mean, he does a lot of different studies, and he's kind of like, and they have vapor guns and everything now. And yes, it might be better, but I think they're producing stronger mites
and how
again.
When you're looking at an acid, what'll happen is the mites will have their little pads that they climb around on. The acid gets into the pad and it kills the mite. And all that's happened is now the mites that have really tough pads that don't absorb the acid, they're the ones that are living, and they're the ones that are breeding, and it won't be any time at all, and any of those acids aren't going to work either, right? So the bottom line of all of it is that I've taken the reverse psychology of all of it, which is we'll create that with a bee. Whatever that bee can put up with, if it can live, great, and we'll breed off of it. If it dies, I don't want it in the hive, and I want to move on to the next one that will live without any problems, right? The bees have been on this planet for at least 120 million years, maybe even there's some new research now that they're thinking they might even be here as long as 165 million years. It's not like they haven't run into a few problems. All of these problems that we're talking about, these are all modern day problems. These are less, some of them are 30 years or 50 years in the making, right? That's in the span time of bees, that's nothing, right? Yeah. You got to get back to basics. And the basics is if you just allow that bee to be in a clean environment, you can have success, and that bee will learn how to live with that mite and learn how to live with everything else. Yes, you will lose some bees, but you will produce the bees and they will move forward, right? Yeah. That's what we need to do. Now, if we can it's very hard inside of the farming community. If you want to tell a farmer, I don't want you to use these pesticides, I don't want you to use these chemicals. I want to use a bunch of chemicals inside of my hive, but I don't want you to use anything out there in your place. It makes it extremely difficult to do that, right? Yeah. So the first thing you do is you clean up your own house. Second thing is you have somebody else clean up their house. So that's the issue when it comes to bees when we're trying to make those things happen.
Well, and that kind of, brings up some of the stuff from like working in, with coffee growers, stuff like that. When you go into a third world country and you start trying to explain this, like, don't use the chemicals that they've given you. Don't do these. And they're like, but it kills the bugs.
That's right.
Like,
yeah.
But it's not good for you. And they're like,
but
it's not going. It's not staying here.
Yeah. And it's very, when you're looking at a beehive, when you're looking at like varroa mite, it's extremely difficult to harm one insect and make another insect thrive. When you think about that for a minute, when you're trying to dump something inside of the hive to do that, it's crazy. It really is. It's just crazy when it comes to that. Yeah, all things run much better in the world if you don't dump chemicals and you don't dump antibiotics on things. It's just amazing. It's a real simple concept, but it's amazing how many people don't get that concept and they don't realize, that they are doing something to harm things.
Yeah.
And is it worth all the things that you're doing when in the net end of things you're just making that bee reliant on something that you're dumping in. When you're done dumping all that stuff in, how's that bee going to live? And that's the issue right there.
Well, and it's interesting, too, that the Asian honeybee, right? Is that the other one?
Yes.
There's 7 different bees, by the way, on different continents, right?
Yeah.
And
There's
doesn't have
Africanized
any
bees
issues with the mite, right?
Well, actually, they actually, that's where the varroa mite came from.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Like, they started there.
Yes.
They are built a little differently, and they tend to abscond. They have learned to deal with the mite.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When you evolve with something, you don't have an issue with it, right? People that live in Egypt can drink their water and it's not a problem. You go over to Egypt and drink that water, you're going to be in trouble. The same with Mexico. The Mexicans can drink their water, not a problem. They've grown up with it, right? But you go down there and drink that water and Montezuma revenge, right?
Right.
So that's the issue when it comes to that. So those mites, that's how that turns up, right? The story is, and there's a couple of different people that have said stories, but I will tell you the story inside of the beekeeping that I heard on how that mite showed up. They had shipped 10 or 12 European hives to China to show the Chinese how they kept European bees, and they would produce all this honey with European bees. They brought them over to China, showed them everything. It was a 1-year project. When they were done, they should have left those hives there. Some idiot packed them up and shipped them back and shipped them into Florida, okay? And from there, that's where the varroa mite showed up. Now, that is not, when you look this stuff up, that's not the story you're going to find. But inside of the bee world, back in the day when we were in it, okay, and I talked to a lot of beekeepers, that was the story kicking around, okay?
The Asian bees, they swarm a lot, and that breaks the brood cycle of the mite enough. But they don't produce as much honey.
Yeah, but they're also not bothered by that mite.
Yeah.
It's a symbiotic relationship. Usually anytime, you never want to have something that is a parasite that lives off of something else. It's not in the best interest to kill your host, right? I mean, if you're killing your host, where are you going to live afterwards, right? So the varroa mite with the Asian bees is not a problem. It really isn't, right? Yeah. And they were originally they chased down some Russian bees that were living next to the Chinese border because they were exposed to that mite, and they brought those over to try to breed those and be able to make that happen. The problem with the Russian bee is that they don't want to brood up easy. You can't throw sugar water at them, so they won't brood up quick. So you're not going to be able to get
sorry, we're not doing that.
We're not. So you can't use them for almonds. So the beekeepers don't want them because all these different. It always gets down to the point of, if I can't make money with it, I don't want it, right? And so that's the issue when it comes to most farming. You can produce things. So the bees that I'm creating, for me to create a bee that will live without all of the antibiotics and without miticide chemicals and everything, there'll be a little bit of interest with that. For if you're a backyard beekeeper, you're going to want that. But for the commercial guys, you're going to have to give them that bee, and it'll have to do one of two things. It'll either have to be 8 frame or better in the middle of winter, and I never fed it, which would, bonanza, you can make a fortune off of that. Or I can sugar feed them and get them to the 8 frame or better, because I'm going to go after that almond money, right? If you're not going to produce that, no one really wants to hear it, which that's not the goal that I'm trying to do. I'm trying to produce a bee that will just live in your backyard and be there. A good bee, in my opinion, the definition of a good bee is one that's in the box. Every time you open up the box, you find a bee, right? It's no fun when you go out there and find your bees dead. I can just tell you that right now. It's no fun, right?
Yeah. Well, the other thing that this brings up too is it's how nature works as the world, right? So we've done a lot of amazing things as humans, and we've connected the world through airplanes and travel and these things. But there's these natural barriers called the oceans that separated things.
Yes.
And even things like Hawaii. So like the creatures and things that were native to Hawaii were native to Hawaii, and they had their own ecosystem, and like nothing had an issue with it because it had its own natural predator and all those things. But like the deer issues that they've had and stuff like that, where we broke the nature chain, because the thing that separated the things that could live on Hawaii and live somewhere else is the ocean of water. Right. If a creature could somehow survive and get all the way over, then they
would have done it.
They could do it,
and they would adapt.
Right.
Yeah.
But if they can't, when we break that chain, we start. I mean, it's great. I love world travel, and I love that we have that ability. But that's the thing we have to balance.
Unfortunately, yes, we've managed to take rats and cockroaches and everything else you can imagine. We bring plants that don't belong, insects that don't belong, all sorts of things that don't belong, and we move them around from place to place to place.
We were at a bee club on Whidbey several years back, and a woman there, and she was so very. I'm not going to say radical because it meant a lot to her, but it's like native plants. She kept talking, well, I don't want to plant that. That's not a native plant. Finally, Andy goes, you do know why they're called European honeybees, right? And the look on her face, she never came back. She realized, I said, you need to be keeping mason bees because the European bee is a non-native, you know?
Yeah, she was very upset with the fact that we were talking about that you would have to sugar feed things. And I try not to sugar feed my bees.
We don't.
And the only time that I'll do that is if they're really extremely low on food or something like that. But in the last couple of years, I haven't even, I keep a lot of honey on my bees. But she was so upset with everybody talking about putting sugar to their bees or whatever else. And it's like, well, you know, they're not going to get what they need. They're not in Europe where they would normally be able to do the ebb and flow.
Yeah.
You know, if they were in Germany or France or, you know, Italy, you know, they would have no problems, right? They're in the Swiss Alps. Don't worry about it. Right. Anyway, but yeah, they're here in Washington, and it's like, oh boy. And you know, we make a living off of noxious weeds. Most people don't realize that, but everything, more or less, everything that I need for my bees to survive, i.e., whether it's the berries that are on, you know, or dandelions, or the, you know, anything that's knotweed, you name it. I mean, everything that they, you know, all these people, they say, oh my goodness, I don't want it, or spray it out, or I don't need it. Or, my bees need that. And if you were to take all that out of the environment, I wouldn't be able to keep my bees here.
Right.
So there's, you know, loosestrife and all sorts of different things. They're all European weeds, you know, star thistle, you know, all these different thistles and everything. The Canadian thistle, I mean, you talk to farmers, oh my goodness, blah, 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 you know, got to get rid of all that. Got to spray that all out, you know, and you got the counties over there screaming at everybody.
Right.
And yet, that makes great honey, and it's good for the, you know, it's good for all the rest of the environment.
Right.
So it gets weird sometimes when you're looking at people and talking to them and deciding what is good and what is bad, right? Because it's already here. I mean, thank goodness somebody decided to put pen and paper to the fact that if I sprayed out all the blackberries out of the Northwest, there wouldn't be anything left to be able to have here in the Northwest, right? So they quit spraying those berries. They used to, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And well, they still do in certain areas.
Yes.
In certain areas, but you get my drift where there's just no way to get them. Once they're entrenched, that's it. They're here, and the birds eat it, everything else eats it, the bees make honey off of it, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, it's an interesting dilemma when it comes to that. Right, yeah.
Well, so another question I want to bring up with you guys, I've heard, and I don't know, I don't have any sort of like reference or anything to this, but when it comes to like the digital signals, radio signals, like our airways are so busy now, with mobile, with LTE, with everything that's going on. Does that in any way affect bees in, because I think my wife was reading an article that was saying like how that was affecting their ability to even sometimes find food and things like that.
Yeah.
Have you guys heard anything on that or experienced anything with that?
Okay, so that's been rumored for a long time. Okay. I will pose the different question to you, and that is, if you could prove that that was true and it was wiping out the environment, would everybody be able to give up their new technology that they wanted anyway?
Right.
If 5G was going to wipe the planet out, would that stop us from doing it?
Right. Well, it's the same question with AI.
Right. Exactly. Right. And so with that, I'm not sure that mankind can do it. There's lots of things. When you're looking at humanity, there's lots of things that when science will be able to prove a lot of things that everybody else won't accept, but will they accept the fact that they have to change? One of the problems for the bees, which is that mankind has studied bees since the beginning of our existence. I don't know if you know that or not, but every civilization...
And they have successfully completely mapped the genome of the bee.
Yes, but every successful person on the planet has kept bees. They've exploited bees, they've kept bees, they've studied bees. They know more about the honeybee than anything else on the planet, okay? Because we've had such a long experience with all of it, all right? So now when it comes to dealing with the bees, they don't have, usually when they bump into something in the real world and they want to say, ooh, that doesn't look right. Well, we better do a study. Let's do the study and find out what they once was, and then we'll find out what's going on, and we'll find out all these other different things, right? When it comes to the honeybees, you don't need to do those studies. We already know what they should be doing.
Yeah.
When they start doing something that they shouldn't be doing, we already know that we're in trouble.
And when it comes to...
Okay, so they're the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, when it comes to wireless signals, I've seen studies in both that support both sides.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have seen both. Coming from Verizon and stuff and technology, I am not pro 5G, but I don't think it's going to get stopped.
Right.
And it's just because of the height
Yeah.
of the signal. I mean, at least right now it's way up there, right? And now it's just going to be basically right above your head.
Right.
And it's going to be, you know, every other pole. I mean, it's the only way it's going to work.
Right.
So and we have learned with some bees. There was a place on the east side. Remember, went and saw that gal, and there was those. It's over by Arlington, out towards I think Monroe. And there's these big power lines, and you could just hear it, right?
Yep.
When you're standing there, and
it's
you're
just
like,
that buzz.
"Ooh."
Yeah, she wanted me to keep bees there, and I didn't want to do it because I was right underneath the power poles. Yeah, and I wasn't. I
So,
was gonna
so you
bother.
ask us what
So,
we think and what
Yeah.
we know. Well, we
Right.
know what we didn't do. We didn't do
Right.
that just because we
Yeah.
didn't feel comfortable. There was a place on Camano, and it was just, we struggled. We were helping a young beekeeper, and her bees just would not live. And it turns out they were, you know, kind of a nice triangle from the dump and the golf course.
Yeah.
And and they had brood problems, just multiple brood problems.
all
And we
sorts of
think
issues, yeah.
between getting in their nose into something in the dump they shouldn't, and what they'd use to keep, you know, the golf course green and free of weeds.
Yeah.
Just
Golf courses are one of the most chemically filthy place you could ever imagine. They use more per square foot on a golf course than almost anywhere else, right? And it's
Okay.
because the golfers, they don't want them to get bit by anything. They
Right.
don't want to be bothered by anything. So they're going to keep all the mosquitoes and all the bees and all the flies and all of this and all of that. And they're trying to keep everything green and perfect. And they're dumping a lot of chemicals
To do
on
all
there
that,
to be able to do
Yeah.
that. So yeah, you can't. It's virtually impossible to keep a beehive.
is
on
it
yeah.
Marla Spivak out of Minnesota
Yeah.
did a bunch of studies on that, and then actually went out to a couple golf courses in their area and have actually converted them to, or figure out ways to convert them to organic.
Okay.
Right, so
Because-
that they could actually have bees on the golf course.
Yeah,
And and have a live zone instead of a
Yeah.
death zone. Right.
So
Yeah.
she's kind of
So,
patented a program that they're trying to
Yeah.
to get out there.
but it was
so.
a well-known issue when it
Yeah.
comes to that. So
Okay.
yeah. It's tough.
So when we were starting the conversation, I think before we hit record, you were saying how you do certain parts of the beekeeping, and then you do the other. Bonnie does the other part.
Yeah.
First, how is that split? And then second off, Bonnie, you said you won't really go near the bees either.
Yeah. Okay, so if it involves a bee sting, Bonnie doesn't want to be there. I could kind of
Well,
tell you that right now. So yeah.
my transition from telecommunications to where I'm at now in the financial services world, I went through a period of time. I was on the steering committee for the Port Susan Farmers Market, and because I was basically unemployed, I had a lot of time, so I was able to put a lot of effort into that initially, and I would go help him, and it was so enjoyable. And I thought to myself, well, why don't we just make a business out of this? And so he is a mad scientist, and every time he sees a hive and he doesn't think something's quite right, it doesn't matter what's going on. So neither one of us really wore a bee suit. We had a bee bonnet, but I only had a loose shirt. I mean, it was a long sleeve shirt. It was loose. We were collecting honey at a location where there was a known hive that was kind of nasty. In fact, we ended up having to move off that property because they got so aggressive. And and so so we're collecting the honey, and we're gonna walk quite a ways. And at the time, we hadn't switched to our smaller boxes, so they're full of honey. They're heavier than, and so you got your arms full. And he sees this hive, and he goes, "Oh!" And I said, "Don't you dare! Don't you dare! Don't you dare open that hive!" Well, I said, so he says, "No, I'm just gonna." And he touched it. It kind of kicked it over. I got stung multiple times. It crawled up my arm all the way
All right, there was only 3 bee stings.
Oh,
Okay,
no.
just
No,
3
no,
bee
no.
stings. But that killed the business
I said, "No, I'm
opportunity
gonna go
of
get
me
another
doing.
job.
Now,
I don't think I can do
the
this."
good news is that I wasn't ready to really become do business the way we were talking about doing it anyway. I hadn't been a beekeeper long enough, and
That's
one of the
true.
hardest things about doing beekeeping is that every year you learn new things. And I've learned new things now for 15, 16, 17 years since I've been doing bees. I've learned a lot of stuff just in the last couple of years, things that I wouldn't ever think that would happen with bees and stuff. And that's the hardest thing when you're dealing with bees, which is things change. And so it's either one of a couple of different things. One, you learned it wrong in the beginning. Or secondly, things have changed to where it used to be that, but now it isn't.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, because that's...
Our first model was farmers markets. And we really wanted to be hyper-local because our bees were hyper-local, our honey's hyper-local, right? So Friday
Still
was...
hyper-local.
Yeah.
Don't worry about
well,
it.
yeah, but I mean,
Oh, my
that's where
goodness.
we wanted to focus, was were the market where the honey's made. So Camano was Monday at the time, and Stanwood was Friday.
Yep.
Well, by the time all this, we started the Port Susan Farm, we did a bunch of stuff, and I was doing it, and then I got a job full-time. And so then by then, a lot of demand, so we were in the Arlington market on Saturdays, Friday in Stanwood, Monday on Camano, Thursday, it was 4 days a week.
Okay.
And most of them weren't weekends.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this one was having to do it all by himself, which was fine. He's a better salesman than I am, but he wasn't doing his beekeeping.
Right.
Yeah.
So we had to change our model of doing business, and that's when we switched over to wholesale.
Okay.
Because that's my brain going. I looked at him and I said, honey, this is great, but I can't spend all my bonuses on bees every year. There's things in life we want to do.
Yeah, really.
So we need to find a business model that works, and wholesale has worked for us.
Yeah. But also what's worked for us is that when I quit buying bees down in California, because that was very expensive and it was a expensive trip to go down there and do all that, when I started making my own bees and doing my own queen breeding and everything else, it changed the model of how I was going to do things. It changed our business model, right? And it changed it for the better. But anytime you change things, you have to readjust everything that you do, right? You cannot do business the way you used to do it when you used to do this and now you do that, right? So it was an interesting thing. We had to change how we were looking at things and how we were dealing with things, change the actual goals of what we actually wanted to do.
Yep.
I can tell you that when I was doing farmers markets, I didn't have the goal of producing a bee
Northwest
that
bee.
Was going to live through everything without chemicals and without, even though I wasn't using anything, it wasn't my goal to create that bee. I wanted to buy that bee from somebody else so I could rock and roll.
Yep.
And that's been one of the hardest things, is actually when you have to create the things that you have to make, it becomes a completely different thing. You run a bakery, and honestly, you get sacks of everything that you need to make that bakery happen. But if you had to produce that sack that came in,
totally different.
Completely different thing, right? I mean, completely different, right? And that's what ended up happening to me, which is, oh my goodness, I had to start re-looking at all sorts of different things.
So,
Now, it made me a much better beekeeper.
I really respect the vendors at the markets, because, you think, the market's only open 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever, but it's a whole day thing. It's a whole preparation. And that's my job, is preparing the jars and extracting and getting the honey and we were very
good
fortunate.
thing she got stung, because then we didn't go down a different bunny trail. Yeah,
we
really.
were very fortunate. We did not even know that Judy was the former president of the Bee Club, and we saw an ad. We were small at the time. We started with 3 hives. We did the same mistake everybody makes. You extract it in your garage with the door open, and the neighbors call 911 because where are all these bees coming from? And you make all these. But we had gotten big enough. I mean, we had to have something, and she happened to have, an extractor, a radial, extractor, and everything for sale, literally 2 miles down the road from us on Camano.
Yeah, that was fortuitous.
Yeah, that was
But
very
our
fortuitous.
business started way back in the day when I decided to start keeping bees. I had 3 or 4 hives. I had produced about 200 pounds of honey, which 200 pounds of honey isn't a lot of honey, but it was way too much to consume for ourselves.
Yep.
We had moved from Fresno Clovis area, so we had new friends that we had up here. We had old friends that were down in Fresno. We went ahead and bottled everything up, and we gave away as Christmas presents the honey that we had made.
Yeah.
Right. And that was great. And then about by the end of January, I started getting letters and phone calls and other things. Oh, that honey was just wonderful. Do you have any more? I want to buy some. And, the unfortunate part was, well, no, I gave it all away. And they said, what are you doing that for? And from that moment on, we have never been able to produce enough honey. We've never been, no matter how many hives I've had, no matter how much I've done, no matter how much work I've done, I've never been able to produce enough honey. I've turned away business constantly all the time. We don't take on everybody that wants to sell our honey, right?
Yeah.
And so we've been pretty careful about doing all of that stuff. And it was an interesting business model as far as going down, a strange trail. And I will tell you that our honey is so good up here that I knew beekeepers that were down in Fresno, and I had given some of my honey to them, and I hand paint jars. I have jars that I hand decorate. I'm known
He
for
does
that.
that part.
Yeah, I paint the jars. Everybody thinks Bonnie paints the jars,
Nope.
but I actually paint the jars. But I'd given away some hand-painted jars to my friends. Well, they didn't think anything of it because honey is honey and jars are jars, but they liked the painting of the jar. Well, they went ahead and opened up the jar and they tasted the honey. And I had phone calls from some of my friends, and they called me up and they said, Andy, he goes, got any more of that honey? And I go, yeah. And he goes, all right, I want 2 barrels. Now, a barrel is a 55-gallon drum, all right? And that's about 660 pounds of honey, right? So the guy was asking for 2 barrels of honey, which in the honey world is nothing, okay? And yet, on that particular year, I only had 1,300 pounds of honey for the entire crop that I had, right? And I said, that's my entire crop. And he goes, well, what do you mean it's in your entire crop? I said, well, I'm just some little, I'm just a little guy. I'm not a beekeeper like you. And he goes, okay, well, 1 barrel. He goes, and I go, and I don't.
Because honey's very regional.
Right?
I mean, orange blossom you
Right.
can't get here, but it's delicious. Fireweed's another one you got to chase.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah.
anyway, he wanted to get a hold of the honey, take it to San Francisco, sell it for a fortune, right, and make money off of me, right? And he goes, well, hurry up and start making more of it, right? I mean, I just had so many people that wanted our honey. And the good news is that the honey that we make up here is fantastic. The bad news is we don't make very much money. And we don't make very much honey when it comes to up
in the
here,
Northwest,
right? When it comes to that in the Northwest, right? And there's only so much you can charge for honey, all right? Our honey is very expensive, and yet, there's limits to what you can charge, there's limits to what you can do, right? But there's also limits to how much honey you can actually make up here. There's, nobody's here to make honey up here because you don't make that much.
When we went to
so-
Hawaii, there's only 2 weeks out of the year they don't harvest.
Wow.
Yeah.
So reverse.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Almost. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we went to one honey guy that he was making 40,000 pounds of honey for his year.
Do you know how many
And-
hives he had?
Yeah. Take a guess at how many hives that he had to make 40,000 pounds.
Hundreds and hundreds?
Yeah, hundreds and well,
100.
normally there would be thousands and 1000s.
Okay.
But
He had 100 hives that made 40,000 pounds of honey. Okay, he was constantly
That is
extracting
insane.
money away,
Isn't it?
honey away from those bees. Yeah, and that's the complete difference when you're looking at it, as opposed to here, where I'm lucky if I can average, if I average 10 or 20 pounds per hive. I feel like I'm doing great. And there's times where I'll look at it and I'll say, oh, here's 100 pounds. It's great out of one hive. And then I'll have 3 hives in a row that don't have anything. So the averages go down really quick, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, and there's only one time a year where you can actually pull honey, right? So it's tough when you're looking at those things. Yeah.
Right. Well, the other thing I think with the localized honey thing, and I don't know if this is necessarily new information, but I feel like we're starting to get a lot more of it, is people that have allergies and stuff, the regional honeys help those allergies from that region.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of people.
But they knew that in the 1700s, the 1800s, the 1900s.
well, people are
Everybody
connecting
knew
that
it.
the pollen grains that are in that honey could be the
rediscovery
pollen
of
grains
that.
you're reacting to. So it's like antigen therapy.
Yeah. And the difference is, way back in the day, before you had everything mechanized and everything moving around, all honey that you would find would be local honey, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. And it wasn't fussed with. It didn't have antibiotics inside of it. It didn't have miticide chemicals inside of it. It was all local. It didn't. You just some farmer down the street there, and you traded your stuff for that stuff, right? And lots of people kept honeybees on their property to be able to, to deal with things. Now in the modern day world, you can't trust that the honey that you're buying, even though it's from a local person, that it actually is truly local honey. Now, the definition of local honey, just so that we get it, because there is no definition of local. My definition of local honey is that I kept the bees on Camano Island, Stanwood, Arlington. The honey was made there off of the plants that were on there. It got extracted here. It got bottled here,
In
right?
the state
and
of
it got sold
Washington,
here.
we're
okay?
obligated to put on where the honey is put in the bottle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if
Where
I
it's
wanted to
bottled.
buy barrels of honey coming out of, lots of different places. It could be Utah, it could be Montana, it could be, so it could still be, it could even be Northwest. I could buy barrels of honey out of, Oregon. And then I bottle it inside of my, basement, and I'll call it local. Who's going to know the difference? The only one that'll know the difference for the most part, if you've ever tasted our local honey, you would know it. But also, if you're trying to use it for allergies, it won't work when it's coming out of somewhere else.
Right.
And our honey does work for your allergies.
Yeah.
And lots of people know that already. So they're willing to buy our product because it works that way.
Yeah.
And it fixes that, right? Because then your immune system reacts to it. Now, the closer you can get that honey made to where you live, the better off you are.
Yeah.
Okay, as far as that goes. For your allergies.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
I'm personally allergic to work. So, no matter how much honey I eat, it doesn't seem to help. Well, but, anyway.
Very cool. Well, there's other things we didn't end up getting to.
That's all right.
But we can always do second interviews later on. But I like to end every interview with some rapid fire questions. I finally changed out one of them because one of them kind of overlapped. So, anyways, you're getting my first new rapid fire question. So,
new version.
Anyways, it is. What is a purchase of $100 or less that you've bought in the last 6 months that you've really enjoyed or gotten a lot of use out of?
I can answer that.
$100 or less. My
that's
goodness.
easy.
What?
Ananda's soap.
Oh,
Now, that was way less than $100, but it's the only soap I use anymore. I just bought some at the market on Tuesday.
Yeah, it seems like everything I buy is over $100. I think I'm gonna skip that question. Yeah, really.
All right. Pretend you have a friend coming from out of town. What would their first day look like here?
Oh, well, we've had a lot of friends come from out of town. I think the first impression is, most people, especially when they're coming out of Fresno, they're not used to seeing the ocean. They're not used to seeing clean air and beautiful trees and an ocean and so they're quite taken away
or
from
a ferry.
just their...
So commonly we would do a loop, either breakfast or dinner on Camano when we're done. But leave Camano, go drive Deception Pass, go around and take the ferry back around and up through Mukilteo and do the whole loop.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
In a day, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're going to eat breakfast somewhere you really enjoy and dinner somewhere you really enjoy. And just wrap it up. Yeah. People have really responded to that because a lot of them haven't been on a ferry.
Right.
either.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's very typical of what we would try to do to give the exposure. My favorite place up here, the quintessential place, is Deception Pass.
Yeah.
If there was one place that I would take anybody to say, hey, this is the Northwest and this is how it feels.
Yeah.
Right. It's there.
Yeah.
I just love that
So
place.
cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Very cool. Who is a fascinating or interesting person in this community that I should interview next?
Ooh.
Wow. Well, since
But
we know
you
all
haven't
the little,
already.
Yeah. Well, I don't know who you've.
You can really, if you throw out names, I'll tell you if I have or haven't.
Zach and Haley.
Yes.
I think they are.
Yeah.
And we keep bees there and stuff. With them
Well,
and, stuff,
and
so.
you've already probably done Rachel at Island Harvest. Yeah, I'm thinking of all the
I would
farmer
say
people.
Connie and Neil. I would say.
Yeah.
Connie Martinez and
Yeah.
Neil Rimland.
Yeah. And
That
Connie,
woman knows how to make everything.
Yeah, she does, and she has a fantastic garden, and she creates
send
duck
you her
eggs and all
email.
sorts of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So she's actually.
That's a good choice.
Yeah.
How about Tori?
Tori.
Tea for your
Tea
dragon.
for your dragon. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, Tori is another one. Yeah.
Or Tracy at Picnic Pantry. I'm
Okay.
thinking of all these small business owners.
No, that'd be great. So Tori.
Tori, what's Tori's last name?
Are you kidding?
Oh, it's in my
That's
phone.
fine. But she's the tea
owner.
shop in
Yep.
Stanwood?
Yep,
Yes.
yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And then the owner of Picnic Pantry, always forget her name.
Tracy.
Tracy.
Yeah. And Connie knows Tori quite well, actually. They're really good friends. So,
Okay. Very
For
cool.
that matter.
Awesome. All right. And then lastly, if you could have a message on a billboard on Camano Island, right as you're driving on the island, what would that say?
Oh, like the one right here. Oh, maybe right on the island. Either way, this one is well known.
Yeah, go home. Yeah, really.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, really.
That was a common response.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Ooh, see, and I'm saying slow down, you move too fast. But I have to commute every day on
You
and
know
off
what's
the
hard
island.
for us? When we first came here, We came from California, and of course, we heard all the nonsense of, you come from California, change out your plates really quick. Don't let anybody know that you're from California.
And start drinking coffee. Forget the tea.
We actually lived, the first place that we lived was in Thunder Ridge. We bought a house there.
Oh, okay.
And in Thunder Ridge, there's, 120 homes and stuff. The dirty truth was, everybody there was from California. The question was it 2 weeks, 2 years, 20 years? But, everybody had originally come from California for the most part. It's actually kind of hard to find a native here, and especially a native that actually, was born and grew up on Camano Island. That's a toughie. Yeah. If you want to find a Mohican, that's really hard to find.
Yeah, I've got a couple of I've been able to track down and talk with.
Yeah. And they'll tell you the way it used to be,
right.
And how
before there
was all them California people here. Yeah, really. Yeah.
Yeah, we're transplants from Arizona, so we're a little farther south, but
okay.
we are escaping harsher.
Yes, climate.
Yeah.
Yes.
But so it's been tough as far as just looking at the fact that and we love it up here. It was the best move that we ever did. Was leave California.
Yeah.
California has just become this horrible place that nobody wants to be. It's high taxes, it's litigious, it's just, everything you can imagine. I miss some people there, but I don't miss California at all.
It's so,
The smog was really bad where we were.
Yeah, and right now the fires are just wiping everything out just outside of Fresno. Yeah. That's where the main fires are, Toll House and Shaver Lake and everything else. Yeah. And we have friends there and everything. We know all that area. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's just horrid.
Yeah.
Yes. So.
Yeah. No, California, there's so much going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yeah. It was less painful than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
All right.
All right. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Andy and Bonnie Swanson for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us be found by other Islanders like yourself. And for more information on this episode, go to CamanoCommons.com/EP64. That's CamanoCommons.com/EP64. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.